Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Shake Up Your Shelves, Diversify Your Book Collection, brought to you by School Library Journal and sponsored by HarperCollins Children's Books. I'm Joshua Bean with School Library Journal, just popping in to give a few housekeeping notes before we hand things off to Donalyn Miller, who will be your moderator today. Your screen is completely customizable. You can resize any of the windows and move them around, so feel free to adjust as needed to get the most out of your desktop space. And if you accidentally close any of the windows, you can bring them back up by clicking on the appropriate widget down at the bottom of your screen. A copy of today's slide deck and a couple of other resources are available in the resource list window, and you'll be able to download your CE certificate from the certification window once you've met the viewing requirements. You can tweet us at SLJ with the hashtag Shake Up Your Shelves. And if you experience any technical difficulties, you can click on the help widget where you can find system requirements and FAQs. And if that doesn't resolve your issue, you can send a note through the Q&A window. So with all that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our presenters. For our moderating today, we'll have Donalyn Miller, award-winning teacher, author, and stat developer. And we also have educator and children's literature specialist, Autumn Allen, and author and Newbery Award medalist, Erin Entrada Kelly. Okay, so with that, I will hand things off to Donalyn to get us started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted to be here with you. I cannot wait to introduce you to Autumn and Erin for our engaging conversation today about the importance of diversifying our bookshelves in our classrooms, in our school libraries, in our public libraries, and in our homes. I appreciate Harper Stacks and HarperCollins Children's School and Library and SLJ Webcast for sponsoring this event. The Shake Up Your Shelf seeks to help educators with the title recommendations, resources, and critical evaluation tools to take a look at classroom library collections, school library collections, and look at the types of books that we're putting in front of our students and our children to read. We recognize that it's important for children to read lots of stories about lots of different people from lots of different voices. The world is a beautiful and amazing place full of so many incredible people. We can't possibly meet them all, but books give us a chance to meet many more of them than we could ever meet in person. We want the world to be as big for kids as possible. Books help make the world bigger for kids, and we want to open up the world of people and their stories to children as well. We know it's important for students to be able to see themselves in the books that they read, positive, affirming portrayals of their experiences, their family's heritage, and their own culture. But it's also important for students to read about people who do not look or live like them. And as educators and caregivers connected with children, we must be mindful and intentional about the book collections that we're building for students, looking at the communities that we serve, the voices that we're offering them, and how can we use books to expand our students' horizons. I'm delighted to be here with scholar Autumn Allen. She has created some incredible resources for you, and I know that you are going to enjoy learning from her about her work and her scholarship. Autumn Allen is an educator, a writer, a reviewer of books for children and young adults, an independent scholar of children's literature. Her work with young readers and learners spans over a decade in community-based settings. She holds an MA, MFA in children's literature and writing for children from Simmons and a master's degree from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She studied cultural psychology there. She's the current writer in residence with the Associates of the Boston Public Library, and I hope Autumn shares a little bit with us about what that work is like. She's currently completing a novel for young adults. Autumn, as a parent, a mentor, an educator, a scholar, and a writer, is interested in children's literature as a tool of cultural transmission and as a potential site of cultural transformation. Autumn, I'm delighted that you're here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's great to be here with you and Erin and with SLJ and HarperCollins. I'm so excited for this conversation. It's really important, and I hope we can all learn from each other.
The Shake Up Your Shelves program, you've partnered with Shake Up Your Shelves to create a guide, I would say more a protocol for teachers, librarians, and even caregivers to look at the books in our school collections, in our home collections, in our library collections, to determine whether or not they are providing the positive, equitable representation we would want children to experience in the books that we read and share. I know that you've sort of divided this guide into two different ways of looking at books, both the existing books in a collection and also the books that we might add. Many of our attendees here today probably have classroom library collections or school library collections already in existence, but they may not know how to critically evaluate some of the older books in the collection, or those books that have been around for 40 years that we know are still available in a classroom or a library. How can a teacher learn then how to decide when to retire a book? And Autumn, there's often nostalgia tied up in a lot of these books too, and I would like us to talk about that a little bit. Do you want to share with us your thinking as you were looking at the books and developing these questions a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of what we need to do as adults, educators, caregivers, mentors, anytime we're relating with youth and sort of passing on values, standards, beliefs, our culture, is really sort of be critical and, think about what is normalized in the messages that we're sending. So, this first question that we have here, if the book contains offensive or outdated language or disparaging descriptions of underrepresented groups, that's kind of like a given, although people still do hang on to, some of the titles that have, offensive language. For the most part, we're sort of beyond insisting on keeping those around in classrooms and, pushing them on children, even if they sort of benefited prior generations. But what's more subtle is number two, is whether, a certain type of person, a certain type of family is taken as the default, is taken as normal. And then anyone outside of that is just sort of, just strange or, disdained or in some way abnormal. And I think that's what really affects children, because they really pick up on these things. They're learning how to be in the world, as we know. And so, when they have to sort of align themselves with a character in a book, there's great potential there, right? For empathy, developing, a new perspective and understanding different experiences. And then if they're consistently over and over identifying with this one culture, which sort of tends to be the white middle-class American culture, right? And so that's the subjectivity, and everyone else, from other groups is sort of an object, either a sidekick or an enemy or, just someone who doesn't give their perspective in the narrative. Then we're learning to always see things from the perspective of, white middle-class American culture. And that's, as we know, it's just not realistic, and it's not fair. So I think that's what we need to work on.
And as you said, that messaging to children when the books that they encounter in school are predominantly white protagonists, predominantly middle-class nuclear family with a straight dad and a straight mom, and they're both still married. And I think about the books I read as a child in the 70s, like the Bobbsey twins, that kind of family, which doesn't exist in most places, and it certainly doesn't exist universally across every experience. And we see that in the other media that children see and listen to as well, the TV shows that they listen to, and media, the books then just become one more medium where they're getting that stereotyped messaging and that negative messaging.
I think it's so important to see books as media, right? Because it's not showing you pictures or, it's not on a screen, that doesn't mean it's not sending a definitive message about, what acceptable values and norms are. It definitely, with text, there's more complexity and you're able to really take different perspectives. But we do need to see it for what power it has.
And you talk about power a little bit in the guide as well. What are the power dynamics in the book? Is it always is the best friend or the secondary characters where we might see some diversity in sexual orientation or race or ethnicity or religion, while we still have the white main character, and the secondary characters often just serve the advancement of that story? For teachers and librarians to really dig into these books on them, you're suggesting that they read a lot, that teachers and librarians become very familiar with the books that they are putting in front of students in the classroom, particularly books where they may not have an understanding of the dynamics or the culture in the book. Can you talk a little bit more about that, the need for teachers and librarians to build up knowledge of the books that are available?
Sure. Yeah. So much of it is about agency and who the sort of implied or understood reader is. So if the child who is a student of color comes to a book, it's clear to them that this book is not written expecting them to be the reader. They feel that, and they may or may not be able to articulate it, but, it may come across as disinterest or, I couldn't get into it, I stopped halfway through, sort of attitudinal things that are very frustrating for educators can actually be a factor of not having the appropriate material. So it's so important to have a variety of perspectives and identities represented in your library so that people can find what represents them and what represents others. And they can really see, that books represent the real world, because, that's like a main sort of factor that makes children disinterested in school, is when they feel like it has nothing to do with the real world, right? So when we have a library that really does reflect back to them the world that they see around them and the world that they experience, that's when we can keep their interest. So yeah, reading widely for teachers is so important in order to just know what's out there.
It's so much more than just the books on the shelves. Yes, you already touched on so many pieces. I am a scholar of readers, I suppose, if you were to describe me as anything. I'm fascinated with people who read of all ages and what motivates and engages people with reading, what makes people invest in a reading habit for a lifetime, and also what turns people off of reading. And you talked about engagement there. We complain that kids don't read, but we have to look at in some places, but we have to look at what the offerings are. It is an access issue. Do children have access to the stories that are going to engage them? If you never get an opportunity to read a book in school that reflects anything about your reality, your experience, or your family's lived experience, why would you be engaged with reading? It seems like if we're trying to engage children more with reading, which I hope we are, we want them to have stories that reflect their experience so that reading can become something meaningful for them. You also talked about the world and how the world is full of so many diverse voices and people. We often hear in education the term college and career ready. To the point that you and I and everyone else are probably rolling our eyes. I know I said that during Teacher Appreciation Week. Sorry to our audience, but we've all heard that term college and career ready so much that we just eye roll. But if your students go the first 18 years of their lives never reading about anyone who has a different experience than they do, they are not college and career ready. They are not prepared to go out into a global society. There's so many reasons why these books are important, Autumn. I'm thrilled that you have created this guide in order to give teachers a little bit of guidance and the thoughtful questions. As teachers, we often know the question is where the learning starts to happen. Yes. You've given teachers a lot of reflective opportunities here as they're looking at collections. So thank you for that.
We learn so much on our end as educators, when we take this other critical look even at books that we loved growing up, or, you know, at books that have some merit to them, you know. And it's also, you know, I know the guide is sort of binary, where it's like decide whether to keep it and then, you know, decide what to bring in. But there, you know, depending on the leeway that you have as an educator in your setting, there is some opportunity for comparing, you know. So the more they're exposed to it, if they're able to process that, then that can be a good, you know, a good opportunity for critical thinking, you know. So if you have the diverse voices come in first, and then a sort of older text come in, and then study it as a product of its time, you know, and discuss, you know, how does this sort of perspective make you feel, and how does it, you know, how is it different from the perspective of a person of color? You know, that's an amazing learning opportunity. I have had outstanding conversations with children of all ages, you know, and I think we underestimate them. But, you know, we can start as early as picture books, you know, preschoolers, you know, talking about fairness and justice, you know, they're very intuitive in that way. So as long as you're ready to dig in and be a learner alongside them, possibilities are endless.
We know that children experience racism and stereotypes at a very, very young age. They can't be too young to start learning about dismantling them and also pushing back against them. And I would also ask educators who seem, because I hear that same thing, they're not old enough to do this kind of thinking or this work. You are underestimating your kids. Kids always just blow me away, dazzle me with the thinking and things that they're going to do. And they need a chance to be able to do it. I, as an old lady teacher who grew up in the 70s, you know, I often talk to other white teachers like me, and they often push back on this because they have such nostalgia attached to these books that were beloved to them in their childhood. And but it's also about building up your knowledge in the current day. We can have our nostalgia and also accept that there are things about some of those beloved books that are deeply troubling and problematic, and that as a teacher or a mom, as a grandmother, I would not the children in my life. I think about The Little House on the Prairie when I was a child growing up. You know, it was a TV show in the 70s, Melissa Gilbert, you know, and everyone on TV. And I loved those books, and I can still see the illustrations in my mind. I can hold that childhood nostalgia for Little House on the Prairie, and all those afternoons my sister and I pretended to be pioneers. And I can also, as an adult, recognize the racism, the xenophobia in those books. Two things can be true at the same time. One does not erase the other. And talking to white colleagues, I often feel that that's the pain for them, is that they've recognized the books. It's not about their pain, let's be clear, but it's about their nostalgia for the books getting mixed up in what they want for their students, which is to give them good reading material and to open up the world. There are a lot of...
Yeah, I think one way we can sort of shift the conversation, because I think, you know, that sort of leads into another question, which is, why is there an assumption that books being written today can't become classics? You know, why is it that those are the classics and that's it? You know, the classics ended when? In 1970, you know? So that's where, you know, your former question about us as educators being well-read really comes into play, because it's true. You're not going to want every single book that's being published now in your classroom. You know, it's not that every book is great for discussion and, you know, fodder for contemplation, but there are plenty of books being published now that are well-written, lyrical, literary, you know, that you can have great discussions about, that are written by people of color, you know, Indigenous people, you know, and represent diverse views. And so I think, you know, we have to be willing to do the work. We know as educators, we are all about doing the work because we just want what's best for children, right? So I think, like you said, it's decoupling that our former experience from what has to happen going forward. You know, they can also have the experiences we've had without it being around the same books that we used, if that makes sense.
Well, we could ask classic to whom? Classic to whom? because it's predominantly a white male narrative set in the historical past. That's a very narrow group of people determining what is a classic. It just seems to perpetuate some of the white supremacy structures in our libraries and in our schools that we don't want to be a part of and that we want to actively work to dismantle. You've given us a little bit about what to do to look at those books that might be those nostalgic, books that are evergreen that we still have in the classroom for 40 years. But you've also given educators some guidance in what to do when they are selecting and evaluating new books for the collection. And I like how you just start right away by centering it on the kids and the community. That's where we start. We don't necessarily start with a catalog or with a website or with a preview. We start by looking at the students and the families that we're serving. I know you do a lot of community work with different organizations. Can you talk a little bit more about that community piece and how the library should reflect that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just tell an anecdote. In one of the after-school book clubs I ran, I was trying to sort of lure in some kids who were saying, "Oh no, I'm not interested," And I said, well, you could come to the first meeting. I won't be hurt if you never come back. Just find out what we're going to do and see if you're interested. And so one girl who was just like, "This is not for me. I'm not a reader. I don't like books." She sat there with her arms crossed, and, I presented some options. And one of the books I held up was Rickshaw Girl. And as soon as she saw the cover, she said, "Oh, that book is for me." And the surprise was like, she had never seen such a thing, a book that was clearly for her, about her, written by someone like her, So that moment, if you ever get to be the person who introduces a child to a book, that they didn't know could exist, it's just phenomenal. And her mom called me that night. It's like, "What did you do? My daughter never liked to read. Now she wants me to take her to the library," And so, you just really have to be aware of not only who is coming in and out of your doors, but who might be coming in and out of your doors if you had the right things on display. Of course, you can't go out in the street and grab people and pull them in, but as far as having it be a welcome space for anyone who does walk in, that's where, the job of librarians and teachers comes in. Knowing what all needs to be reflected, and it should just be diverse, so that anyone can find anything that represents them and that represents, an experience they've never been exposed to.
Well, and as you say in the guide, even in a homogenous population, that diversity still needs to exist. It's the books that are represented, but it's also whose voices are missing. Whose voices are missing? Because when a voice is missing, it's a judgment against it, whether we mean it or not. And what we might be communicating to young people that I hope we don't mean is that their stories do not matter, or that we don't care about their stories, or worse, that they should be ashamed of their stories. It's vital that our shelves represent as many voices as honestly and accurately as possible. I like that you're also pushing people to look at the books themselves that they're using. It's not just about putting BIPOC people on the shelves. It's about what are the stories themselves about. And you talk a little bit about books always being set in the historical past. Perhaps books with Native Americans are often set in the historical past, as if we no longer have Native Americans in North America. And then the idea that the books that we put in front of students shouldn't just be books about suffering and pain. Every Black child doesn't want to read about slavery. Every Latinx child does not want to read about being a migrant farm worker or crossing the border. Our students need positive, affirming portrayals of all sorts of experiences. And often as teachers, and I have been guilty of this myself as I was learning as a teacher, when we add some diversity into the reading list, it's often to teach social studies content, to teach a certain historical time period. Can you talk to us more about your work and your thinking in that regard?
Yeah. So like you said, it's so tempting, right, to take these topic books, to say, oh, this will go with the unit on civil rights, and this will go with the geography unit, right? And that sort of, if you step back and look at the message that is sent to your students by your organization of the curriculum, it sort of sends a message that, just like science and math are things you have to learn, people of color are, objects that you have to learn about, right? Rather than other people on equal standing who have their own perspectives that you should also, look through, try looking at the world through the eyes of diverse people. And so, it's harmful for white students and it's harmful for students of color, because if you're always looking at yourself from the outside, that's what creates that sort of double consciousness, that Du Bois wrote about, and that is still, an ongoing sort of plague in school and out of school.
This lesson was actually taught to me by one of my own students, and they are our best teachers. Yes, I had a student in my class when I taught 5th grade, and she was a Black girl, and she told me in reading conferences that she hated historical fiction. And I took that on, how we teachers are. I took that on and said, oh, I'll find her one she'll like. So I gave her the Watsons Go to Birmingham, because I thought it was the history part that she didn't want to read. She was a big fantasy reader at the time. And I thought, well, that book is a family story for almost half of it, and she will really get into it. But sitting to talk with her about the Watsons Go to Birmingham, which we all know is a wonderful book, she said, I don't like historical fiction because all the books that have kids like me are depressing. I don't want to read those books. And I had to think about my whole process in picking that book for her and go back and rethink everything. But I'm sad that a student had to teach me that lesson, but I'm still grateful for her for doing that, because she felt empowered enough at least to speak up with me. Yeah. But how many times have we done that? How many times have white teachers read aloud or read aloud, and it was the one time a year that kids got to see a child of color on the cover or in the book, and it was a book that was about their suffering. Thank you for speaking to that and for putting it in this guide so that we can look at it with each individual book that's being purchased in the collection. I know that we have so many resources and things to share with our group of attendees. We might have too much for us to talk about during this time, and we barely scratched the surface, Autumn. Do you have any other things that you want to leave educators with as just a rallying cry or some sort of inspiration or empowerment?
I would just like to really emphasize the idea of agency and the idea of, empathy. So, with agency, it's about who's telling the story, who's doing the looking, who's doing the acting, who's doing the decision making, because with the Western style of novel, it's typically the hero's journey, right? And so you have this one protagonist their decisions are making things happen, right? So to be able to see that agency can be in the hands of any type of person is so critical for all of our children. And then, empathy, it just, we don't have to like a main character. We don't have to agree with the main character. And I say that partly because the novel I'm writing, my main character is, going to rub some people the wrong way. But, it's about being able to see the world through someone else's eyes, and to be able to just see what it feels like to be a different kind of person in society, because I think that's a huge thing that is missing in, everybody talks about, the past few years being so divisive and, people just can't talk anymore. Partly it's because people don't know how to put themselves in other people's shoes, right? So books are an amazing tool for that, and I hope that we can use them in that way.
Thank you so much for your scholarship and your voice here today. I'm glad that we're connected on the internet now and that I get to continue to learn alongside you. Do you have any resources here? I know that all of us came together and just put a few resources together. Are there any resources here you want to make sure people don't miss?
So diversebooks.org has within their website a diverse book finder. So that is a good tool that you can use to if you're just sort of pressed for time, as I know all of you probably are all the time, and you just need to find a good book for one kid, you can go in there and sort of do a little research to find a title. So that's one I would point out. And then Disrupt Text I really love because, it's a way, for teachers to really sort of broaden our thinking about how to teach these kinds of texts. And I'll stop there. I have an article in the RDYL, the Research on Diverse Youth Literature, and they have a lot of good things coming out every season. So check them all out.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. If you're not familiar with Disrupt Text, check out the hashtag online as well. Hashtag Disrupt Text. Disrupt Text is a movement started by 4 women of color, all educators. Dr. Kim Parker, who's in Boston, Trisha Abarvia, who's in Pennsylvania, Lorena Herman, who's here with me down in Texas, and Julia Torres, who's in Denver, all of them middle school and secondary educators. And they really started that movement with the intent to disrupt the traditional canon of books historically assigned to middle schoolers and high schoolers that predominantly feature the work of dead white men with an average copyright date of 100 years ago. And they share not only book recommendations through that hashtag, but a lot of resources and a lot of engaging conversations. Autumn, thank you so much. I appreciate you sticking around for us while we get to learn from Erin. And I really appreciate everything that you had to offer for us today. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I did notice in the chat that a couple of people, and Autumn, you can certainly chime in if you want or not, a couple of people like Janet and Chandelia have asked about the history aspect. Okay, we've talked about how books that are historical might be depressing. Are we supposed to avoid those? I don't think that's the intent of what you're saying, or that what we're saying, that we don't have to stop reading historical fiction now. It's the intentionality behind how those books are being used, and they can't be the only book that we share with kids all year. Am I interpreting that correctly, or?
I think so, yeah. I think we want to make sure that, and it can start to feel a little formulaic, saying, okay, if I had a book on slavery, then I have to have one, present day on Black joy. It can start to feel like you're doing too much calculation. But I think we're in this learning period and this growing period where that's kind of necessary right now. So if we see that we did a unit on slavery and they got all this exposure to that sort of history, it is important to then bring in some contemporary, stories that have different emotions, coming up with that same group that you already taught about in that, that historical situation. So I think the balance is going to be important.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that and answering our questions. I am delighted that we have Erin Entrada Kelly here with us. We got to chat with her before the webinar, and it was hard not to just squeal with delight over what a wonderful author and person she is. Erin Entrada Kelly has received the 2018 Newbery Medal for Hello Universe, a 2021 Newbery Honor for We Dream of Space, the 2017 Apollo Award for The Land of Forgotten Girls, among many other honors and accolades. She's a New York Times best-selling author whose work has been translated in many languages. Kelly also writes and illustrates the Maybe Marisol Rainey. Yes, I said illustrates. I hope she tells us a little bit about that. Maybe Marisol Rainey series, brand new series. It's so delightful. Erin was also a finalist for the Philippines Free Press Award for Short Fiction. She teaches at Hamline University in their Masters of Fine Arts program. She lives in Delaware. I'm delighted to introduce you all to Erin Entrada Kelly. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. What a great conversation that was.
Oh, I feel like I could talk to Autumn for a year. Don't you feel that? Like we could just,
Oh,
I have
yeah.
a lot, but she's just her scholarship and her thoughtfulness is just something that is such a gift for all of us. How are you doing, Erin? Happy Teacher
I'm doing
Appreciation
great.
Week.
Happy Teacher Appreciation Week.
To all of our guests here. And I know that it's been a long, hard school year for everyone. And we really need to appreciate our teachers right now. Erin, I know that you got to listen to a lot of Autumn's remarks and our conversation, and you've also been speaking on this topic for a long time yourself, the need for us to diversify our bookshelves. But I'm also curious for you, you grew up in Louisiana, is that correct? Am I remembering correctly? And so not far from me here in Texas. And how did you see diversity, or did you see any diversity in your mind reflected in the books that you were able to read as a child growing up in Louisiana?
The books that I read, no. So I, of course I was a little bookworm, but all the books I read were predominantly white middle class girls. So I read a lot of Judy Blume, love Judy Blume, of course. I read a lot of Sweet Valley High, these kinds of things. And I've been writing for a long time too. So I started writing when I was about 8 years old. And all the characters I wrote from 8 years old until adulthood were always white girls. And I would get excited even if I saw a character that had dark hair in a book, because that wasn't something that I often saw, right? Or brown eyes. So, when I was growing up, it didn't feel like they weren't readily available at my hands to read books with never mind Asian or Filipino characters, but any other characters. And we're not just talking about racial and ethnic and cultural diversity, but even families with divorced parents, or families who have low income, or like all these different ways that different families can be depicted. I didn't even see that, So it wasn't something that I felt like I wasn't mired in it. We'll put it that way. And same for TV and movies, right? Like the same thing there too.
And so you felt as an author that if you wanted to be a writer, you had to write white characters because that's what you saw? Or did you just feel like that's what went in books? It didn't, because you had never seen real representation in the books you were reading, did you just not feel as an 8-year-old writer that was something that you could do?
Yes, it did not occur to me for a second to write about a family with an immigrant parent, or a family where English is one of two languages spoken at home, or any of that. It didn't even occur to me until much later. And I've talked to other authors who have shared that as well, where it wasn't that I actively didn't do it. It just never dawned on me that I could or should do it.
And that's changed, and we're all glad that it changed. Not just for children, but also for you. But what did that look like for you in your growth as a writer, and what would it have meant to you then as a writer and a child to have been able to see yourself in these books, and how did that change for you as a writer as you got older?
So I think that's okay. No, I think when I was growing up, it absolutely would have helped me better understand myself, to feel less alone. One of the things I always say is that my goal as a writer is that the child reading it feels less alone, even just for the duration of reading the book. But it wouldn't have just helped me better understand myself and appreciate myself, but also better understand others. Like if I had read books about all kinds of different cultures that I wasn't a part of, I would have been able to better understand my peers, better understand the world. And that's how we evolve as humans, so there's really no reason not to have these books out there and not to give young people especially access to these books. And as a writer, what happened was, as I got older, I would try to write books and stories that mimicked what I had read growing up. And I just didn't feel connected to the work. It would just kind of fizzle out. And so I quit writing books for a while, and I started writing short stories. And I started writing short stories based on the stories that my mother told me when I was growing up about her childhood in the Philippines. And she had all these rich, rich stories. So I started writing those as short stories. And because I had a connection to it then, because I had an emotional resonance and emotional attachment to the work, I was able to start finishing things. And I was able to write manuscripts because now I was connected to it. And that's actually when I realized that, oh, wait, I can write about this stuff. You know, how come I haven't been doing that this whole time? And so I started, you know, kind of gleaning from my own personal well, as I call it. And, you know, that's all she wrote from there, literally.
And the world is better for it. I will just say that.
But thank you.
Your books are so important for kids. And I love what you had to say about how kids would be a little less lonely when you're reading your books. Because for a lot of us who were readers when we were kids, we were maybe a little lonely and we had a lot of book friends, you know? So you're giving kids some book friends that look like them and also look like people who are not like them. How are you thinking about that as you're writing books for kids? You know, not just the not wanting to be alone, but also wanting to give them the world of people in your stories.
So I think about, you know, I get asked this a lot, like, how intentional am I, you know, with representation? And I think, you know, the stories that I write, the characters will look like whatever that world demands of it. But because we live in a world that is very rich and diverse, very often the cast of my books are going to be rich and diverse. And if the book calls for a homogenous society, like in Melania of the Distant Sea, which is one of my first and only fantasy, it's a homogenous society because it makes sense for their closed world. But then I you know, make sure to depict layers within that homogeny, right? Also. So I think about that. And I also think about, though, like with Marisol, for example, which comes out tomorrow, book birthday. I think about not just the fact that Marisol is Filipino, like I was, but that also she is a very kind of scared, and she's a little worrywart. She's not like a spunky, go get 'em kind of girl. And I think about that as well when I write for kids, because I think that even just our racial all our different identities that we have, one of those identities is, you know, our interior life. And I think that a lot of kids out there, like you said, Donalyn, little bookworms like us, who maybe were sad and felt very lonely as kids, and maybe we didn't know why we felt that way, and maybe we were too scared to climb a tree like Marisol. Those kids deserve, that spans all, you know, ethnic geography, that spans everyone. And those kids, too, need to know, you know, you can be a main character in a book. When I was a kid, for many, many reasons, it would have never occurred to me that I was worthy to be a main character in any story. I didn't even feel like a main character in my own life story. So I feel like that's something that I think about all the time when I'm writing for young people, that they can see, oh, I'm a character in this book, or this is me.
Well, congratulations on Maybe Marisol Rainey. I had the honor of getting to read it early, and I have not seen all the illustrations, though. So I'm excited that I'll be able to pick up my copy from my independent bookstore tomorrow and see all the illustrations. Can you just give us a little peek, a little glimpse into what that story is about, since people will want to know?
Yes. So Marisol is basically me. And of course I don't have it like a copy like at my fingertips. That's a bad author. So I know, right? I should have it like to share, but follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and I promise you I'm sharing a lot about it on there. So basically Marisol is me when I was 8 years old. And, you know, I struggled just really quickly, like whenever my editor and I decided to jump on this train of writing a book for younger readers, I had a lot of trouble because I was really trying to write a spunky character, you know, like a precocious kid. And then finally she said, why don't you just write about yourself at that age? Because my precocious characters are not coming together. And I told her, I said, you know, no one's going to want to read a book about a kid like me. I mean, I wouldn't even climb a tree is what I told her. You know, I was too scared to even climb trees. And she said, well, basically, there you go. And so, and then it dawned on me. She said, why don't you write about that? I said, why would someone want to write a book about a girl who's afraid to climb a tree? But then when I got on the train after that meeting, I started thinking about what she said, because I had told her, I said, I wasn't an interesting kid. No one's going to want to read that. And on the train ride home, I thought, would I ever want to tell a kid, any child or any person, that they are not interesting because they're afraid of things, or they're not interesting because, they get scared, or they worry, or they feel sorry for themselves sometimes. I would never want a kid to feel that way. And so I thought, what, little Erin, you're worthy of a book too, right? So Marisol is basically little me. And that's the whole premise of the book, is that there's a big tree in her backyard that everyone climbs. And she feels like she's the only kid in the entire world, which is how it feels when you're a kid. She felt like she was the only kid in the entire world who's too afraid to climb a tree. And she's very down on herself about it. So that's what the book is about. And she has a very rich interior life, but she feels like she's not brave enough for this world. So that is Marisol.
And not just a book for little Erin, but also a lot of other kids that are going to be able to see themselves in Marisol now. You wrote it for all of them too. I can't wait. I have a granddaughter who's 9 who needs Marisol. And so I will make sure that she gets to meet her tomorrow. Congratulations, Erin. And thank you for just sharing your heart and your thinking with us. Do you have any last things you would like to say to teachers and librarians during Teacher Appreciation Week and about this topic, or anything else?
You know what? I think the best thing that I can say is to everyone here, if you're here, it's because you care about being a better educator, about being there for the young people in your lives. And teachers and librarians are my absolute heroes, not just because I'm a writer, but all my life, right? So thank you for everything you do and for everything you've been through this past year and beyond. And I just want to say thank you, honestly. I mean, I could go on and on about how much I love teachers and librarians, but I won't. Maybe we could have a separate 1-hour webinar where I just talk about how much I love all of you.
And you would have very high attendance, Erin. That's what I know.
I'll just stroke all your egos for an hour and talk about how amazing you are and how you're changing lives. But I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you so much. And again, congratulations on just all the accolades for your work. It was great to see you.
Thank you, Donalyn. You too.
Erin kicked us off by giving us a book talk on her new book. But before we go, we wanted to share with you a few books that Harper Stacks and Harper Children's has put together for this webinar, books that exactly represent the kinds of stories that we're trying to promote, that we want to put on our shelves. We've got a little bit of something for everyone. And I'm excited to share a few of them with you. So let's go. Where Are You From? By Emily Syed Mendez, illustrated by Jamie Kim, is a writing teacher's dream book. That's what I will say. You might have, through your teacher education program, read George Ella Lyon's poems, Where I'm From. And this is a twist on that brings it into a more contemporary and diverse family setting. We have our main character who has been asked before, where are you from? And that question automatically makes her feel pushed out, othered in a way. And talking with her abuelo, her grandfather, he helps her take that question, where are you from? And he opens up her family's Argentinian heritage, their background, Argentina, where they come from, and helps her see the connections, the beauty, and the power in where she's from. Wonderful writing opportunities for students, for them to be able to share their own backgrounds, their own families, their own experiences. Eyes That Kiss in the Corner by Joanna Ho, illustrated by Dung Ho. Joanna Ho is a teacher like all of us, and she has done some great things online for teachers this year around this book. Eyes That Kiss in the Corner is about another young girl who's struggling with aspects of her identity because of the microaggressions and even bullying that she receives from people, in particular about her eyes. And she loves her eyes that kiss in the corners because they're like her mama's eyes. They're like her Maymay's eyes. And she sees those eyes connecting her to her Taiwanese family and her Taiwanese culture. This is a book about family. It is a book about belonging. It's a book about positive identity development, and it makes a fantastic read aloud. Kids are eager to share their thoughts when reading this book with them. As someone who often curates book lists, who works with many schools and libraries to build their book collections, to evaluate their book collections, I have often over the past few years looked for books about Black and brown boys who are 6 years old. And there are not that many of them when you start looking intentionally for the books. And I'm thrilled that Kelly Starling Lyons has launched this new I Can Read series, Ty's Travels. Nina Mata has made these fantastic, joyful illustrations. We meet Ty in his rich imagination, in his imaginative play as he flies rocket ships and operates a train, and his interactions with his family are charming. Kids will recognize the dynamics between him and his parents and his siblings and friends. Wonderful early reader chapter books for kids. I'm looking forward to more of Ty's travels to share. It is the month of Ramadan. Ramadan Mubarak for everyone who is celebrating this month. A wonderful book for any time of year is the new picture book In My Mosque by Mio Yüksel, illustrated by Hatem Ali. Mio Yüksel is from Turkey, and Hatem Ali is from Egypt. And in this picture book, we see a celebration of mosques, the Muslim faith, Islam from all over the world. There is diversity within the Muslim faith, which is global, and Muslim traditions are not celebrated in the same way in every culture, of course. And In My Mosque travels all around the world, featuring children experiencing their faith, their religion, their places of worship, their interactions with their families and their communities. It's stunningly illustrated. It's the type of book where you'll want to go back and look at individual illustrations again and again. The Highest Tribute by Kekla Magoon, illustrated by Laura Freeman, two Coretta Scott King honor winners and legendary creators. The Highest Tribute, Thurgood Marshall's life, leadership, and legacy, is a chronological picture book biography of our first Black Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. It starts when he is a young boy and when he changes his name from Thurgood to Thurgood. He gets in a little bit of trouble at school, and as punishment, he is forced to read the U.S. Constitution as punishment. And instead of feeling punished, he feels inspired. He goes on to become a lawyer, of course, as we know, the primary lawyer in the legendary and important Supreme Court case, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka. He went on to his illustrious career as a Supreme Court justice. There is a fantastic timeline in the back of this book looking at Thurgood Marshall's life. Wonderful launching off points for inquiry, for students to study more about notable Black Americans and perhaps even study Thurgood Marshall in more detail. That book, by the way, has already gotten 3-starred reviews. The Sea in Winter by Christine Day is a middle grade novel set in the Pacific Northwest. Our main character is Macy, and Macy has spent quite a bit of her young life learning how to be a ballet dancer. She takes ballet classes. She's very serious about ballet. She's very talented as a dancer. And right in the time period before the book begins, she is injured, and that injury sidelines her. She is not able to continue dancing. She is not able to continue training at a time when many of the dancers in her school are practicing and studying in order to apply and audition to, in order to audition for these premier ballet academies. And Macy's not going to be able to do that. She's concerned she's never going to be able to dance again. And all she's ever known is dance. She doesn't know who she is without it. Macy's family, Macy is Maka Piscataway Native American, and the Pacific Northwest and the Native American culture of the Pacific Northwest is another character in the story. It's lushly described, the woods, Macy talking with her stepfather and her mother about their family history. They go on a hike out in the woods to explore more of their family history, and Macy's depression and everything else about her just overwhelms her. It's a book about loss. It's a book about resilience. It's a book about families. I think it would make a fantastic read aloud. And it is one of the inaugural texts for the new Heart Drum imprint from HarperCollins Publishers. I hope you check out the new Heart Drum imprint. Strong Voices by Tanya Bolden, illustrated by Eric Velasquez, is a collection of 15 American notable speeches. It is Cokie Roberts, the white journalist Cokie Roberts, wrote the foreword. And this is the kind of book that I think middle school teachers would love, because you can read a few of the speeches and share them with your students in the classroom and then offer up the book for independent reading. Each speech is notable in its own way and could spark students' interest in studying the figures who gave those speeches, the historical context under which the speeches were given. Eric Velasquez has managed to capture in the illustrations what we could imagine is the exact moment that speech was given in some cases. Another middle school book that you may not have, that may have flown by you this year is The Best at It by Malik Pancholi. You might know Malik Pancholi because he's an actor. He's been in, this is where your mind just goes completely blank. Phineas and Ferb. My grandchildren would be unhappy with me if I couldn't remember that one. He was on 30 Rock for many years. He was in Phineas and Ferb. He was in Weeds. And I watched an interview with him as he talked about The Best at It. And he says that the book is somewhat semi-autobiographical. It features Rahul Kapoor, a 12-year-old Indian American boy who is becoming aware that he is gay. And he is being bullied at school because of it. And he is also being bullied at school because of his cultural identity. He suffers microaggressions all day long, and he just gets fed up with it. And because of the pressure that's on him and the way that he's being treated, he's developed some compulsive behaviors. And one night his grandfather, who he's very close with, witnesses him engaging in these compulsive behaviors and tells him a story. And as the result of this story, Rahul decides that if he can just figure out how to be the best at something, he won't be bullied or bothered anymore. That will be his path. He has no idea what he wants to be the best at. He does not know what he's going to do if he fails, but he sets this challenge for himself, and it becomes a personal journey for him. Amari and the Night Brother is a debut and also the launch of a new series. So you are on the front edge of something fantastic. You will be one of the people in the know when everyone else finds out about this series. Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston is great for kids who love The Lightning Thief, for kids who love The Jumbies, for kids who love Nnedi Okorafor's Akata Witch and Akata Warrior books. Tristan Strong fans, just about any fantasy fan of that age will love this book. Our main character, Amari, is Amari Peters. Her older brother, Quentin, has disappeared. She's been told that he's dead. She does not believe it. She finds out that her brother was invited to try out for an exclusive school. And the name of the school is the Bureau of Supernatural Affairs. Their mother thinks it's some kind of exclusive prep academy. And Amari goes to the tryout and finds out it is, in fact, a magic users academy. And everyone else who is there to audition is a child her age who has grown up in a world where magic is real. And she does not know anything about that, but she is going to try out for the school. The other students are not kind to her. They are suspicious of her. But she's afraid that if she doesn't make it into the school, she's not going to be able to find out what happened to Quentin. There's so much humor in this book, dynamics between the classmates. Amari is a wonderful character. I can't wait for you to meet her and share her with your students. I know that we're running a little bit over our time, and if you have to go right now, you can. We will just continue with a few more books and wrap it up. I want you to be able to manage your time today. Measuring Up by Lily Lamott and Anne Shu is a graphic novel about cooking. I will warn you, do not read this graphic novel without eating something first, because every recipe and food they describe or portray in the book looks so delicious that your stomach will begin growling before you even really get into the book. So get a snack. Our main character is Cece. She and her family have recently immigrated from Taiwan to Seattle. And Cece's going through all the feelings of uprooting herself, moving across the world and into a culture that she doesn't understand and that she doesn't feel really understands or appreciates her. She's homesick. She wants to be able to celebrate her grandmother's 70th birthday with her. And she decides that she is going to impress her grandmother and celebrate her grandmother by entering a kids' cooking contest. And she's not a very good cook. She doesn't really, she's afraid of it. She's afraid she's going to mess it up. She's worried that she doesn't know how to do the recipes correctly. She deals with a lot of just comments about her and about her food at school. And she's got one foot in this desire to be more like an American kid in her mind, the stereotype of an American kid, but also the pressure and responsibility that she feels towards her parents and their beliefs. Wonderful immigrant story. I realized that we have several stories on this list this year that feature grandparents in influential roles or pivotal roles in the story. That multicultural aspect of the story, it will feel familiar to many students, of course. Not So Pure and Simple won 4-starred reviews. It is a contemporary realistic fiction story written by the award-winning mystery author Lamar Giles, also one of the founding members of We Need Diverse Books. Not So Pure and Simple, one of the great things that I love about this book is it's a romance, but it's told from the boy's point of view. And we need more of those, of course. My high school students that I work with, they tell me that all of the time. We have Dell as our main character. He has a crush on a girl, Kira, who he's had a crush on since they were in elementary school. He is not smooth with the ladies, but somehow he's gotten a reputation as being quite a ladies' man, someone who's very sexually active, and he does not dispel this notion because it adds to his reputation with other boys at high school. At church, he volunteers for something in order to impress Kira and realizes that he's signed up to join a group discussing their purity and making a purity pledge and what could possibly go wrong. While he's working on all of these moves to hide why he's really there, he only cares about connecting with this girl. He only cares about convincing her that he is there sincerely. He doesn't give much thought at first to how she might feel in this scenario. Does she even like him? Where are her thoughts, her feelings, her goals, her dreams in this conversation? And through the course of this book, he comes to some understandings about that. The book is also hilarious. And I challenge you to read even 30 seconds of it, or let's say 30 pages, pardon me, without just laughing out loud. Like a Love Story by Abdi Nazemian is a Stonewall Honor book, a fantastic book for high school readers. I can't call this historical fiction because I lived through it, but this book is set in 1989, and for our students, it is a historical time period. It's set in New York at the height of the AIDS epidemic, the devastation that the AIDS epidemic ripped through the gay community, not just in New York, but all over the world. And our three main characters are friends. Their relationship dynamics are complicated. We have Reza, who thinks that he might have some idea that he's gay, but he also has a girlfriend who he cares a lot about, Judy, and Judy's uncle is dying from AIDS, and Judy's best friend Art, who is gay, openly gay, one of the only openly gay people they know, has just decided to rebel against his conservative parents. They're never going to understand him, and he's taking photographs of the AIDS epidemic in New York. It looks at the activism that was taking place in New York during this time period and the experiences of the LGBT community during this time period. Happily Ever After is a romance book within a romance book. Our main character is Tessa, wants to be a romance novelist. She has never seen Black girls like her as the protagonist in a romance novel, but she wants to write them. And she manages to get into an exclusive art school program, an art school writing program, but she feels uninspired there. She feels like the other white students predominantly are not taking her very seriously. But Tessa has a great best friend, Caroline, who believes that perhaps what Tessa needs is a romance of her own. How can she write about something that she's never experienced? And the girls come up with an interesting plan for how Tessa can get the attention of a boy that she thinks that she might like. Black Enough is a short story anthology, and you may have noticed as a teacher, librarian, or a reader yourself, the rise of many short story anthologies over the past several years. And as a teacher, I think they're fantastic. Teachers can read one or two short stories, use them for whatever instructional value they might have in your short story unit or as a read aloud or in your conversations with students, and then offer up the book for independent reading. They will meet a slate of incredible Black authors that they can then follow to read their longer works. It's edited by Ibi Zoboi. Black Enough, Stories of Being Young Black in America, is on the Schomburg Center's Black Liberation reading list. It is an introduction to incredible authors like Renee Watson, Leah Henderson, Donnell Clayton, Kekla Magoon, on and on. And I can see this being a springboard to so much reading for kids. It's also a great introduction to teachers and librarians about who some of the incredible Black creators who are writing for teens today are. And I will leave you with one last book. And I don't like to talk about books that you can't get yet very often, but you have to write this one down. You have to go to your independent bookstore and talk to them about ordering it. It's not coming out until June, so we're really teasing you, but you can hold on for another month. It is just another month till June. Wow. But we have Blackout, and it was written last year by Donnell Clayton, Tiffany D. Jackson, Nick Stone, Angie Thomas, Ashley Woodfolk, Nicola Yoon. You likely recognize all or many of those names. 6 brilliant authors who have come together to write about a summer heat wave in New York that's also a love story and a friendship story. Put this on your list. You will want to read this and share this with the teens in your life. I appreciate all of you so much for being here today. I appreciate Harper Stacks for giving us just all these incredible resources to share with you. The Shake Up Your Shelves program is going to do so much good for kids and teachers out there in the world. Thank you, Autumn and Erin, for your time today. I appreciated getting to talk with you and learn with you, and I know that our audience enjoyed getting to learn with you as well.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for moderating.
Yes, thank you, Donalyn.
Oh, it was my pleasure all the way. I may stick around for a moment or two to see if we have any questions that we need to address before we close up. Do we have any questions that we feel like we want to address before the webinar ends? I'm checking through our questions and answers just to make sure we haven't missed anyone. Several people are asking for lists of books that might be problematic or should be removed in shelves, and I don't know of a list, and I hope there isn't one, because I think we need to have some. Autumn, do you know of a list of just books that we should take off our shelves? I don't know of one.
No, I mean, I think different educators share their experiences with particular books, and, that's sort of the tactic that Disrupt Text takes. And I think, I know it's, especially for librarians, it's overwhelming. You have a huge collection. You can't go through every single book personally and look for what we're talking about.
Nope.
At the same time, it's that critical thinking that sort of helps you talk with readers about, if they're going to read the book, how to sort of, approach it. And so I think it's easier for teachers just to sort of do some research about the titles they have that they're attempting to teach and see what's been said about them. Librarians just have a long job. Just keep looking at those blogs, keep talking to your colleagues and learning yourselves.
Through the guiding questions and the guide that you've created, you're helping all of us learn how to critically evaluate the books that we're putting in the collection. And I don't feel that a list could do that. We won't build in our capacity to be able to do this work if we're just looking at a list. And that would be what I would have to say about it as a follow-up, Autumn. Thank you so much for adding your thoughts to that question. Do we have any other questions that we want to address? Good resource for K-1 diverse books. I would recommend the Brown Bookshelf as a book as a blog for looking for books for elementary school readers. That's a go-to blog that I look at multiple times a week. But Autumn, do you or Erin know of any resource that we could share on just K-1 books?
I don't know specifically for those. I also love the Brown Bookshelf, and all the lists from the earlier slide. Those are all amazing, but I don't know if like that narrow of a focus. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're looking for picture books, there is diversebookfinder.org, and they have sort of just a slew. They try to put together every single book published about children of color that's a picture book. The only thing is they don't sort of rate them, by quality, and I'm not sure if they list whether the author is also a person of color, but that's at least a resource for finding some picture books.
Thank you. And we do have resources to share in the slide resources, and you'll be able to take a look at those. We've had several people talk about parents and the pushback that they may receive in their community from parents or colleagues when they want to put more diverse books into the collection, but they get pushback from the community, either because the community is homogenous, predominantly white, and does not feel these books are necessary. Another person, Nicole Mancini, mentioned that it might be LGBTQ plus content. We know, looking at the list of banned books this year, about a half of them are books that feature LGBTQ plus protagonists. Any resources or advice you would give as we finish for someone who is experiencing some pushback from their school community about introducing these books into their school?
I've been thinking about this since I saw the question in the chat, but I know we have like a minute left, so I'm going to keep thinking about it. And,
yes. The resource that I can think of is used to be Teaching Tolerance. Now it is Learning for Justice. Teaching Tolerance has changed its name, and Learning for Justice has many resources on their website, including modules for teachers for professional development, for resources. I would also look at professional organizations such as the American Library Association, which has resources for librarians on encountering book challenges and also on diversifying your collection, and the National Council of Teachers of English, which has resources for English teachers in the same vein. Go to your professional organizations. They have lots of resources to support you. And I appreciate all of you. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. I wish we could just sit here and I would be so smart if I hung out with Erin and Autumn for the rest of the day, but I think they have to go. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who attended. Thank you. Thank you. Be well.